working in layers or not working in layers, right? So some of you have been setting up, or most of you, I think, actually kind of doing a mix. But let's say we've got this object, and we've got this object, and let's do this object. Why not? And this one can be this color, and this one can be this color. Yippee. Okay. And we've got 3 of these. Someone's looking to get into the meat. Admit. Okay. So we've got these 3 objects, and right now we have 1 layer, right? Okay. Some of you have been taking these, cut, and paste, and making another layer, right? So that you can have multiple layers, or having things on multiple layers. Okay? There's been a lot of mix of that. There's been multiple layers as well as using the arrange front to back. Well, the thing I wanted to show you is, even if you don't make layers, okay? Let me copy this and delete this out of here. All right. Even if I have 1 layer, within that layer, if I drop this little drop down, you'll notice I have 3 ellipses. So what I can do, all right, is instead of taking this and saying object, arrange, send to back, you'll notice what happened here. I can actually take these within a layer and move them. All right? So even if you don't have layers, you kind of have layers. So everything I draw within layer 1, if I'm back here on my main layer, this is the only thing that gets tricky. If I draw something else, all right, you'll notice that that's a path, and that's what that is. And you can actually hide certain paths and certain things within layers. So you have the ability. Now, if you go here and you draw on it, okay, it does create another path. It's nice. It doesn't include it inside here, so you really only go inside of 1 layer. But I wanted to show you that because for those of you that don't want to actually take the time to set up multiple layers, you actually have multiple layers inside of a layer. All right, they're more so objects. That's what Illustrator calls them, but they function just like a layer. You can take this, drag it on top. You can take this, drag it behind. So if the object arrange is hard for you to picture, because it can be sometimes when you have 75 things like yours has, a whole ton of stuff, it can be nice to go into a layer and see all the paths of the objects and move them around. Okay. It also helps you if you've got a line right here and you're having trouble selecting it, all right, or if this is here and all of a sudden it disappears on you and you can't get to it, you have it right here and you can move it up or delete it. All right. So it does allow for file management to get a little bit easier, I find. So even if you don't have layers, even if you don't set up multiple layers, you actually have objects inside of your layers. All right. That's the first thing, which I think can be helpful. The next is a saving thing, how to save your files. So we're really going to deal with 3 file types. All right, we're going to deal with the AI, which is the Adobe Illustrator native file. So whenever you hear the term native file, that means comes directly from the program. So if I say I would like a Photoshop native file, that means PSD file. I usually won't term it that way, but just so that you know the term. All right. The other way we save from Illustrator is a PDF. Does anyone know what a PDF does? Okay, so what a PDF does is it compresses all of the data. So if I don't have a font that you have, and you send me a PDF, I don't have to worry about it. Right? PDFs are going to be when we're handing in assignments that I don't necessarily need to see each particular layer of it. All right. So the way that happens is you simply go to File, File, Save As. The Save As command on your desktop, you get to change these formats, and here is your PDF format. So if you want a PDF, you're going to go to File, Save As. And you can change the format from Illustrator to PDF. That's it. Now, the cool part is if you create PDF in Illustrator, so if I'm in here and I create this PDF and I hit Save, this comes up. If I don't touch anything and I hit Save PDF, what I can actually do is I can go into that particular PDF. I can open it in Illustrator as though it was an Illustrator file. The nice part about this is if you lose your AI file and you have a PDF, you actually can go in. The bad part is you hand it to somebody who you don't necessarily know, they can go in and they can change. So you can change that where you go to Save As, PDF, and then you uncheck Preserve Illustrator Editing Capabilities. And when they bring it into Illustrator, it's one giant block that they can't edit. Okay? But for our terms, you can keep it like that. So that's Save As a PDF. The other one is, and you'll probably use this a bit, is when you're dealing with T-shirts. Right? That machine, the direct-to-garment, needs a PNG file. All right, so we'll go back to my awesome design again. When you're creating a t-shirt, you're going to go to File, you're going to go to Export As. All right, this is when you're creating t-shirts. If you don't remember this from Exploratory, that's perfectly fine. You click Export As. All right, we go to the desktop. Again, everything, save it to your desktop. You can back it up later. At the end of the week, we're going to back everything up to Google, and we're going to delete everything off the desktops. All right, here's the PNG. The big one is to check Use Artboards. The reason is if I have something over here, and I export as, all right, I'll show you this demonstration. I'm going to not keep this checked. I want PNG. All right, this will just be test. I export it. I want to make sure it's on high, which at this point most of them are, and I want to make sure that it's transparent. You'll notice what you see. All right, so when I export this PNG file and I go to print it on my t-shirt, this is what the t-shirt printer sees. All right, and you get both of those on your shirt, which you probably don't want if it's off the artboard. All right, so if you're exporting a PNG file for the t-shirt design, it's File, Export, Export As. You want to make sure you use Artboards, and you do that so that only the one particular piece that you want shows up. All right, so that's simple saving. Last but not least, gradient. I know we've talked a little bit about gradient. I wanted to get into it a little deeper. So your gradient button is down here. Then you have your gradient tool, which is right here. The gradient tool allows you to actually draw your gradient. You can adjust the gradient from here. You can adjust the color. Just double click. Now you'll notice when I first double click on the basic gradient, it's set for black and white, for grayscale. You don't want grayscale. You click on the drop down here and just switch it to CMYK, and then you can change your color. Same thing here. All right. Same thing here. CMYK. Pick a blue. Okay. Now I can edit this, how this functions right from here. I can also click on the line somewhere, see how that turns into a plus, and I can add another color, which allows me to shift. I can also, from the gradient panel, which isn't as fun because you can't do it, right there in front of you, I can do the same thing here. I can adjust, whoops, I added a color. I can adjust how this functions. I can adjust here, the same thing, okay? The gradient tool itself is nice because you can actually draw the direction you want it to come from and how far it's going to do all that, all right? You have linear, you have radial, right? And then you have freeform. And freeform is really cool. Put your phone away. I'm taking it today. All right. Click here, all right, and this takes a second. And what this is going to do is this is a live sort of like pushing light around so you can see what happens. And I can really create some interesting objects. I can also add points. All right, and you'll see that it reacts like light. You'll notice in here it gets lighter. All right, so you can create, when you're dealing with something like fruit, like an apple, or like you were doing the cherry yesterday, this type of thing, because there's not just one or two levels on something like that, there's usually multiple sources of light, and the light's casting around in all kinds of different directions. This is where you can kind of play with that, and you can get some really interesting effects. So that's your freeform. All right. All of these particular gradients can be added to a stroke as well. All right. I don't think the freeform can be. So we'll go back to radial, or linear, excuse me, and we add it to the stroke. So everything can be added to a stroke in gradients, which is kind of cool. And you have the option with your gradient, all right, when it goes through here, if it wraps around, if it goes through. So if I click on the stroke, you'll notice I have, let me hover over again, apply gradient within the stroke, so that's how it does it. Apply gradient along the stroke, so it does it like that, all right? And then apply gradient across the stroke, so it does it like that. So the thicker I made this, the more this would kind of make sense. See how it's going from blue to green this way, whereas this goes blue to green this way, and this kind of passes it all the way around. All right? So you can do that inside of your stroke as well, which can be interesting to create some really cool effects if you're working that way. All right? So I wanted to get a little deeper into that gradient tool just so you could kind of get an idea of when you're trying to create photorealistic things in Illustrator and not just vector-based things or things that look vector-based. Really, this type of thing is the best way to go. It used to be a gradient mesh, which I won't even show you, because basically you add a mesh on top of it and you sit there and try to move the mesh points. The gradient here is so much easier when you're dealing with the freeform gradient. Okay? So I don't expect you, again, to remember all of this, but I want to kind of add to it and continue our little library of things that you can be like, oh, Mr. B showed us how to do that. Let me check the video. All right? Any questions? All right, cool.